Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're here today with Kreg Yingst. Kreg is an illustrator with a focus on block printing, with original works created from carved blocks of wood, linoleum, and other materials, and printed on a paper and other media. His new book is titled Everything Could Be a Prayer, 100 Portraits of Saints and Mystics, and it's published by Broadleaf Books. In this book are 100 colorful, stunning images of saints and mystics from wood block prints, including Teresa of Avila, Howard Thurman, Black Elk, Fannie Lou Hamer, Simon of Cyrene, and Jarena Lee, to name a few. Kreg received his BA from Trinity University in San Antonio and his MA in painting from Eastern Illinois University. His work can be found in numerous international public and private collections, including Purdue University and the Halsey Institute of Contemporary Art in Charleston, South Carolina. Kreg lives in Pensacola, Florida, and you can learn more at kreggingst.com. That's KREGYINGST.com. So, Kreg, congratulations on all your interesting work, and thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Brian. I really appreciate it. I've looked through your podcasts, and there are a number of writers actually that I follow and enjoy. So I appreciate you having me on the show.
Good, good. Well, as we were discussing before, this is a little bit of a departure from, the most typical books that I interview authors for, but yours was so interesting that I thought, okay, I need to let more people find out about this. So I'm glad that we're having a chance to do this.
Yes, well, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Sure, sure. So is there anything else that you want people to know about you?
Well, on the art end, I've been a full-time artist for about 21 years now, and taught at the high school level 13 years prior to that. So at some point I took the dive and a leap of faith and went full time. My income is derived from art fairs, from the internet, from galleries. So I try to get the coins rolling in from every direction. I always say that I've been an art carny for a good portion of my life. So there, you got the circus sideshow carny. I'm the art carny. I go out. I figure I paint the banners. I set up the tents. I drive the trucks, sell the tickets, and every now and then I'll do the monkey dance out there. But I'm pretty much this art carny performer. But it has allowed me an opportunity to make a living doing something that I really love.
Well, that's a serious accomplishment in and of itself. I mean, how many artists can say that, right? I mean, it's not an easy
thing. Yeah. It's probably tough. It's probably gotten a little bit easier. I think with the internet has helped us. It's given us more of a visual audience. So, but yeah, it's a small niche of us out there.
Well, good for you. So before we start talking about the book, maybe you can just share with us how in the world you got into artistry in the first place.
I've had an interest ever since I was young, and I think that was just encouraged by my parents. I drew as a little boy, and I fell in love with it. I got some private classes. I knew I wanted to take it through grade school and the opportunity in the high school classes. I had an awesome high school teacher, Ross Schellenberger, who taught me watercolor, and he was instrumental in everything I did with art. And so then I pursued it in college. But it's just been a love ever since I was young. It wasn't something I came to late. And it's one of those burning things that you want to do. But like you said, it's can you make a living from it? And that's when it was, well, you can always fall back on teaching, that kind of thing. And I hadn't set out to be a teacher. I'd always wanted to just do the art full time, but not necessarily commercial art either. And when I did start teaching, I found out that I actually learned more as a teacher than I ever did as a student. I think it just puts you in that position. It forces you to discover things to then you can then give to your students. So that was very instrumental for me for my own art career.
Yeah. Well, it's very cool that you got such support at a young age.
Yeah.
And then followed through on it.
Yeah, I think, I think that happens to a lot of kids get discouraged at
Mm-hmm.
an early age. And that's what I saw in high school too. I'd have students that were outstanding, and then I wouldn't have them for a second semester, and I'd see them in the hall. I'd wonder, what's going on? Why aren't you out here, taking a second semester? Oh, my counselor encouraged me to do this, this, and this, for their college career.
Sure,
I thought,
sure.
but I thought this is what you really enjoy. This is what you love. This is what you were, your creation, your gifting. But yeah, so
Wow. Well, let's talk about your book. As I mentioned, the title is Everything Could Be a Prayer, 100 Portraits of Saints and Mystics. This is a very unique book. As the title says, it includes your portraits of 100 saints and mystics, but each mystic embodies a virtue or practice, such as mercy, vulnerability, forgiveness, worship, and courage. And each portrait is paired with a scripture, a meditation, and a prayer. So how did you come up with that concept?
yeah, it's probably not a new concept. Devotional books have been out for a long time, and I think I kind of pull from that. I probably pull from a few different things. What you don't see often is the two paired together. I would say that this is a book that deals with the devotional, the early Psalters of the Middle Ages, where you had a psalm and you had an image, and also probably the early prayer books like the Albrecht Dürer. As soon as one of the printing press was developed in the 15th century, Albrecht Dürer was doing the Passion, and he had his small Passion had 36 images on one side, and on the other side had prayers. So there was text and image. And I think that this book brings that together. And that's kind of always been an interest for me I mean, to some degree, it's the historical element. And I think you will find those books out there. You'll find uh, history of saints with one picture per
Yeah,
page.
yeah.
But you won't necessarily find the devotional aspect to them. And I always want to find something that you're connecting with God. You're engaged in that element. It's not just a mental assent or educational assent, but it's
Mhm.
actually an encounter, I guess you would say.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So the book is organized into Lent and Advent sections, each with a reading guide and then, subdivided within each one of those seasons. How did you choose to organize it that way?
And that's a reading guide at the end. I think we actually have the whole book alphabetically by kind of the virtue or the attribute of each person. Um, but that is kind of the Mary Martha thing. And I look at Advent as this quieter time of, and maybe this could be this because I'm in the Northern Hemisphere, but just during the winter months of turning inward, it's looking at the mystery of Christ and the incarnation of the Christ child. And so uh, I pretty much look to choose um, people that would reflect those inner virtues, inner attributes.
Hmm.
Yeah, the prayer, silence, solitude, these various things that we draw within. We go inward, the centering. And then with Lent, I looked at it more as the active Christ moving outward. The ministry begins. The movement to the cross, and it's more the active, the social activists, the doers. And there's obviously with everybody, there's a mix, but with the Advent, it was your desert fathers, the hermits, the ones that are very much interior, the centering prayer, the mystical element, and then the outward was the social activists. So that was pretty much the idea behind it, and each one has an icon, an Orthodox icon at the end. So you're kind of moving up to the the birth story with Advent, and then with Lent, you're moving up to Christ and the cross.
Cool. Wow. So I mentioned in the introduction that you create these portraits using block printing. So maybe you could show folks a few examples of what that looks like and explain it, because I know I have no idea how that works.
Yeah, well, I don't have a carved block on hand, but here is just a block block of linoleum. And there's two different things. I mean, you can use wood, and I do both. There are different types of wood that you can carve from. I will say this, that block printing is kind of an umbrella term for relief printing. So wood engraving would fall under that, wood cut, linoleum cut, vinyl cut, anything where the surface is actually being inked and then printed. And to do this, you're using various tools. This is a gouge. They're various U-shaped, V-shaped. You'll use knives. And so you're carving away the surface. Then the surface will be inked, and that's what's going to show. That's what's going to reveal after the paper goes on there. And then you go ahead and pull the paper. So I have a printing press that I use, and that allows me to make more than one. It's kind of an advantage for both the artist and the consumer, you could say, because they can buy it not as expensive as an individual painting.
Sure.
But at the same time, it allows me to sell it cheaper as well. And at the same time, it's a handmade product.
Yeah,
so it's not a reproduction, a digital reproduction. Each one I have to touch, each one I have to ink, each one I have to press. The ones that you see in the book are actually then hand painted with watercolor. So I'm using an oil-based ink, and when that's printed, I'll pull the paper. You're getting the mirror image of what's on that block. So you're carving backwards, writing backwards. and I say every now and then I'll mess up an S or an N or something, and actually in this book too, there were a few errors I had to go back in and fix, once we decided we were going to use them. I'm like, no, there's a backward A on this thing. Do I really want that? But you make an error, and it's a little bit harder to put something back than once that's carved away. But there are different ways to go ahead and add color. Some are using multiple blocks. Some is what's called a reduction block, where you use the same block multiple times, but you print it each time in between. But then these kind of combine my two loves. It's the printmaking and it's painting. And so it allows me to go back in, and I'll use transparent watercolor and be able to go right back over the oil-based black inks, and then it won't hide the black because the oil actually repels the water. So I guess that's the general gist of how those are created.
Can you show folks some of the portraits in the book?
Yes. Yeah, so there's a piece of John the Baptist there. And the book, I'm pleased with how it came out. I'm pleased with the layout of it. They've chosen to have some of the color repeated that's actually in the icon. St. Ignatius, Teresa. So you have, and then the other thing, they actually blew these up just slightly. The block is about a 6x4, and these are closer to 7.5 by 5 or whatever. But they feature, again, it features Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox. You're going to have a whole mix in this of the Christian faith. And then the other thing I did was I had the image placed on the right side of the book so that you can actually kind of flip through it and see the pictures a little bit as you're just kind of thumbing through the book. So, hard to do here, turn it, but you kind of get the idea there.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So I'd like to read from a couple of the endorsements for the book. One is from another author friends, Carl McColeman, who
Mhm.
says, full disclosure, I've been a fan of Kreg Yingst's distinctive and prayerful woodcuts for a number of years now, and I'm delighted to say that this new book of his shows that he is as gifted a writer as he is an artist. Everything Could Be a Prayer pairs truly insightful introductions to a wide variety of saints, mystics, and holy troublemakers with art that invites you into meditation and contemplation. This book works both as a daily devotional and as a catalog for discovering some truly amazing spiritual exemplars. So can you talk about how you develop your writing skills, to go along with your artwork?
I will. And Brian, can I go back to the Saints and my mix,
Sure,
just
sure,
who I chose just for a
sure.
minute? Um, since there is just a whole slew of people in this, and covers quite a bit of time periods, um, I just I'd like you to know how I chose them, and some of it is, the way I look at it is you start with somebody and you discover somebody new, and then you discover somebody new. So it's kind of like this tree effect, and you continue out on the branch. But it was about 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago, that the Sandy Hook school shooting occurred. And I was, I'm a father. I have two young daughters at the time. And so I was really distraught at what had happened and what had occurred. And it happened in December, I think, of 2012. And so for the following year, I decided I was going to carve one prayer per week for the whole year. It was kind of a New Year's resolution.
Hmm.
And so I'd have 52 of these prints. And I didn't go out seeking a saint or mystic necessarily, but I did look for prayers that dealt with light from darkness.
Hmm.
How can you make something good out of something so evil? And so that was my desire, that these prayers could kind of live on forever, that I could pull these things up. And then in the end, I was going to self-publish my own book, and with the proceeds that could then go toward orphanages. So children that lost their parents or didn't have parents. Here were parents that lost their children. And it was kind of my way of, how can I bring healing to such a dark time in my own, and it wasn't going to, it's not earth shattering, but it's like, it wouldn't have occurred if that hadn't occurred. So that was kind of the impetus of me even starting doing the Saints and the Mystics series. And that was 10 years ago. And I thought, I could paint these, I could draw them, or I could use the printmaking, the block print. And I thought the block print was perfect, because what you have with this, if I were to ink it and print it, you would have one black square, one black rectangle. And as I take a gouge and I start to make this mark, I'm actually carving light. Every time I make a mark, I'm carving light into the image. And then eventually it's going to reveal a face or portrait of a reflection of God, of who God is. And it's also going to bring a prayer into the world. And that prayer is going to then be repeated by people that pick this up and read it. And so that was a whole prayer book in itself. And that kind of got the ball rolling. And then that series was gone. I was on to other projects. 2020 came, and we all shut down. That was the end of the world. And we all kind of went inward, and people were complaining on social media. Everybody, the gamut was all there, And again, it's like I turned to the mystics and the saints for advice. And I looked to those that actually went to self-impose isolation. So the hermits of the desert fathers and mothers, the ones that sought solitude and silence. And it's like, what can these saints teach me? What can I learn from their lives and what they've written? And so that was in 2020. That was a whole nother group. And as that was occurring, everything was falling apart. So we had the George Floyd murder that hit, and then all of a sudden that stirred the bee's nest. And again, it was kind of like, what have I been doing, and where am I? And have I been sleeping through all this? And I've been part of the systemic racism? I wanted to know, and I began to delve into the Black experience, whether it was African American here, the social activist, or it was from other places, from Africa, and see what their experience was and how I could benefit from listening to them rather than just taking on my own opinion and hearing them out and then trying to understand what is it, and what is my role now because of this incident. So that's how I got this whole slew, and I didn't touch on that earlier, but I do in this book, I include very traditional people such as the church fathers. And then on the other hand, I wanted to make it global. I wanted to extend it past the borders. I wanted it to represent minorities. And so I'll have in there Takashi Nagai, Black Elk, Pandita Ramabai, and those that are maybe a little bit more that are marginalized in a way that the church sometimes seems to become, at least from this area, American Christianity. And I want to see like what is the global Christianity? What's the intersection in the global Christianity from various time periods and from various voices, not just voices that I've heard over and over and over again taught from this Euro-patristic mindset. And so it was trying to this whole thing, this whole book of 100 Portraits of Mystics and Saints kind of deals with all of that. It brings all of that to the table. And it was enlightening for me. It was enlightening for me. And I say this, that doing these is to me a prayer and a meditation. It draws you in. I mean, you can't help it because it's time consuming. So you take this person and you're sitting there, it's meditative. It's a visual meditation. And at the same time, you're having to contemplate this person, their words, their prayers, and it helps center you. It's an art form that, for me, that centers me. So I want to hit that, which I
appreciate
really
that.
talked about,
That's
which
really
I didn't talk about
insightful.
earlier. And now on the other end, I was doing an art fair in Decatur, Georgia, 1 year, and a man and his wife walked in. And I typically at these art fairs, I show music. I also enjoy kind of delving into the blues, the Delta blues, and even finding these gospel blues guys and women, men and women. They're just kind of obscure. That's enjoyable for me. But music is what gets exhibited in most of these art fairs. But I always include, since it was music related, I used to put in a little bin of my psalms, and then occasionally I'd throw in some of the saints, So I'd have a Desert Father here, Desert Mother there, Celtic saints. And this man and woman walked in, he's flipping through there, and he comes up and he's like, what is this? And we got to talking, and it was Carl McComb. And and he's like, how are you going to find a Desert Father? Of all the art, he was drawn to this piece and he found it. And what's interesting is I had just, he introduced himself. He goes, well, I write on mysticism. I write on these guys. Oh, really? What's your name? And when he said Carl McCollum, I said, oh, I just read your book, Befriending Silence. And
Wow.
So it was one of those kind of encounters. And I said, well, how about we exchange art for art? And I'm always trading art. I'm bartering it with other artists. And I enjoy bartering with the writer artists. So he took a few of the Desert Fathers and Mothers, and in exchange, I got some of his art, his books, signed books. And I was happy with that. He was happy with that. And I'd see him, the following year. I don't do that show anymore, but over the next couple of years, I would see him and his wife, Fran, and Fran's very artistic as well. And they'd stop in and we'd chat and do an exchange. And And so Carl was very generous in what he said there for sure. But I would say on the writing end, I call myself product of my times. My writing probably generates just from the fact that I like to journal my prayers. I'm an introvert, and so I kind of pull in and I slow it down, and it's just like my art, it's one stroke at a time, so it allows me to form words, to think about it, and they're short, they're brief. And then in addition to that, when 2020 hit, it was lockdown. There goes the art fair circuit for me.
Mhm.
It was like, well, there's my sabbatical. I'm not going out there. So all of a sudden, everyone closed down. Who could have seen that? But I went to social media, and that was Instagram. That was a new format for me. Instagram only allows you so many words, and it's a snippet. And what I say is I write in sound bites, and this book is a sound bite. It's an Instagram sound bite. It's just, you're allowed so much per page, and you reduce it, and you state what you need to state within a concise area. So that's kind of how my writing developed. But I think that there's aspects of it that can be very beneficial for the reader. David Keller, in his devotional book Desert Banquet, writes about how they would gather around the abbot, and the abbot would read, because not everybody could read, and then they would hear something, and it might be a sentence or a word. He said a lot of times they would just take a word, and this was called melite, and that one word would be something that they would chew on throughout the day. It was a meditation, or just a sentence. And that's what they would keep with them until the next time that they would meet. And I had done, prior to doing this, I had done a book of the Psalms, and I did the Psalms in 150 block prints. And that's how I approached the Psalms. It was just kind of, they're not very visual. They're not narrative in nature. And you would read through the Psalm until a visual would come to mind. And it would, a lot of times, it just be a sentence, or a snippet. And then you would go ahead and I'd illustrate that. But I think that's kind of how the writing itself developed for each image, is just through the product of, being a product of my time, is what it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. So here's another endorsement. This one's from Sister Simone Campbell, author of None on the Bus and Hunger for Hope, and recipient of the 2022 Presidential Medal of Freedom Award. She says, everything could be a prayer is the perfect intersection for nourishment in these challenging times. My spirits were raised and my heart expanded, reading and pondering each page. This book is manna in the desert times. So is that kind of what you were looking for, is something that would be uplifting for people to read?
Well, I haven't met Sister Simone, but that was extremely generous as well. And I think it's a byproduct of what somebody's going to get from the book. That wasn't necessarily the intention from the get-go. The intention was to research, because I didn't know all these people, and it was to research these things that I just talked about, of how did you navigate these issues, these difficulties. How does the enlarged body of Christ navigate through things like isolation and things like social injustice and all the rest? And then once I discovered that, I wanted their voice to be out there and known. And so it's, I think people will come away from that finding people that they've never heard of before. I think they will, I think they'll be encouraged by a number of these people in their lives, Harriet Tubman's and Sojourner Truth. And, there's just some phenomenal people that I came across, and some I knew, some I hadn't known before. But just to start getting into their life and their life story and their words, and how they came through some of the most horrendous situations that Takashi Nagai survived the atomic blast, and yet you read his words and they're just grace filled. It's mind boggling, because we were actually going through some difficulties during the time that I was actually dealing with this and doing this as a project. And I'm thinking, my gosh, I can barely get through this, this small part of my life. And yet he's going through that. And it was
Wow.
just, it's inspirational. It's encouraging. They're just some amazing people out there. And that's what I want. That's what I want people to take away from it, is that they can find a connection with somebody, that they can be encouraged, that they can find inspiration, and ultimately, I think it's just a part of their devotional life that they can find connection, connection with God, connection with the divine, and be able to live that out. Just different core parts of practice, of our praxis, So, yes.
So what would you like readers to most take away from the book?
Well, definitely that, and I think the beauty too of the images. I mean, I think approaching art, it's going. Different people are going to relate differently. Some are more ascetic, some are sensates, and but I think there's an element of Lectio Divina, which is kind of what I was talking about, meditating on a word. Taking a sentence and ruminating over that. Visio is kind of different because it bypasses words, so it's not filtered through that intellect in that way. It can be filtered through the imagination, but it's an immediate reaction. I don't necessarily know how to read a picture, and it might be something that you learn over time, how to actually read what the artist is saying through visuals. But you are going to be immediately impacted by it in some way, shape, or form. And I say advertisers know this all too well, right? Our late nights, and there it is, boom, that cheeseburger. So I really could use a cheeseburger right about now. But it's just, there's an immediate impact that bypasses the intellect, and I think everybody's experience with Visio Divina, with divine seeing. It's hard to put a label on, but there's some icons in our house where I can just stand there. I don't have to think, and sometimes I can feel a peace. I can feel my blood pressure just go down. I can enjoy looking at the colors and and the line and the shape and the texture, or the image of the face. I can study these things, and I don't have to be necessarily praying. I can bypass words if I wish to, or it might prompt me to words. But that's what I'd like them to see it as, something unique that they can maybe incorporate into their own prayer life, I guess, devotional life. So it's a spiritual element there that I hope people can take away. And I hope as they come across somebody that they explore their lives further. I think that will happen. I think as you're going through, you might just say, wow, this person is just phenomenal, and I'd like to know more about them than this little snippet gives me.
Yeah.
And then it allows you to go ahead and research and start, treading that water. But,
Well, I know you've been in the midst of introducing this new book, but I have to ask you if you got some plans for future books or other kinds of projects.
Well, I am going to have a gallery launch with this book that'll coincide with this book at the Gallery of Art, Panama City, Florida, and that's on 10/10. So just on October 10th, and that runs for about a month. I do have a couple commercial plans on the back burner. These are not set in stone yet, but possibly illustrating a young adult book. And and there's a good chance that I might be illustrating another of Christine Valter's Painter's Lent books through Broadleaf, if that comes about. But I had illustrated her Birthing the Holy, Wisdom from Mary to Nurture Creativity and Renewal. And I also had last year illustrated or added 5 block prints to a different kind of fast, Feeding Our True Hungers in Lent. So those are on the back burner. I know I'll be doing the art for Bill Maloney's re-release. He was the lead singer of Vigilantes of Love, and he's re-releasing on vinyl the album Blister Soul, and that was from 1995. And I'll be doing the artwork on the cover, the interior, and the back. And I'll be doing the Great Gulf Coast Art Festival November 1st through the 3rd. So I'm still getting out there. I've cut back quite a bit on my art fairs, and at one point I was doing about 18 a year, and now I'm down to about 5 because I can juggle some of these other things. And then the last thing that I have on the calendar at this time is I will have an Advent Nativity show of my block prints at St. Michael's Episcopal Church in Arlington, Virginia, the month of December. So those are upcoming, exciting events.
Yes. Wow. Well, thank you for this contribution, and for all of your work and all of your contributions. As I said, it's unique and it's inspiring, and I hope that people really benefit from it.
Thank you, Brian. I really appreciate you having me on. Yes.
Well, again, the name of the book is Everything Could Be a Prayer, 100 Portraits of Saints and Mystics. Check out Kreg's website, KregYingst.com, and you can also go to broadleafbooks.com, of course, and, order the book from there. Kreg, again, congratulations, and thanks so much.
Thank you, Brian.